Okay, next is Michael Schwartz. Now, Michael Schwartz is a poet of Brooklyn, as you'll hear and see. And he's been read all over the city, metropolitan area, outside of the metropolitan area. This is his second appearance here, and let's hear a warm welcome for a terrific poet, another terrific poet, Michael Schwartz. Okay, so come to the stage.
So what happened? Yeah. You two have a good act going. Wow, Richard, thank you. If my grandma with her Yiddish accent was here, she'd say, and we just met, she'd say, "How did he know?" Because that was about me. And if any of you saw the spent hours like I did watching the hearings yesterday, you will know that it takes a lot of agua to lubricate those lies. So in honor of Karen's, also my grandma would say, "How did she know?" With your elephant and the list of all the animals, that was to me too. And so inspired by both of you, I hope to reclaim our precious water from the monsters of mendacity for the vision of veracity. And in honor of benevolent Bernard Bloch, the bard of Bath Beach, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, its 21st edition of From Whitman to Ginsberg, I'll do my short story, Catch 21. It was the kind of bright blue Sunday morning in September that lures you outside with promises. The day before was the 21st, the last day of summer in the last year of the 1970s. Now, it was the first day of fall, the autumn equinox, when the sun shines directly on the equator and the length of day and night are nearly equal for the last idyllic time before the darkness is spotted lurking around the corner earlier and earlier, lingering longer and longer, insinuating itself into your dreams, making it harder and harder to wake up to a morning colder than the one before. Even though I've been born with a severely defective lower digestive and elimination system with 2 closed exits requiring years of major construction and resulting in my having to go to the bathroom much more often than other people, especially when I was nervous right before participating in a sport or talking to a girl, I was the almost 14-year-old quarterback of a full-contact Little League football team, scared of being tackled too hard, especially on my surgery scars, but trying to live up to the legacy of my living father, who had been my living father, the star quarterback of the 1951 championship-winning Jefferson High School football team almost a decade and a half before I was born, and later a semi-pro winding down his playing days in the middle of my first decade of life. I never got to see him grace the gridiron, but he bathed me in the pure joy of the game that kept him young even as it dislocated his knuckles and damaged his knees. His grateful devotion to his overgrown offensive linemen who happily sacrificed their face maskless noses to keep him from being mauled by the drooling goons of the opposing team hunting for his barely protected leather-helmeted head led him to a lifelong love of large men, such as the burly butchers he later hired to work in the meat plants he managed. When my non-athletic cousin had a sudden growth spurt to over 6 feet tall, but still had no interest in sports, my father's mantra became, "What a waste of a good tight end." What he would have given to have that kind of height. So whatever it takes to win was his motto, such as blinding the enemy by grinding dirt in his eyes when face to face in an intimate embrace upside down at the bottom of a pileup. But those scenes wound up on the cutting room floor of my subconscious, and the reel-to-reel home movies of my imagination instead ran footage of my father calmly and bravely standing in the pocket for as long as it took to find the open man, or suddenly extricating himself from the clutches of certain death by sacking like a fleck of gold suddenly spotted and sifted from the mud, scrambling to daylight, still alive with the taste of touchdown on his tongue. Still trying to get those 10 yards for a first down, he was now just shy of being 10 years divorced from my mother and had moved to Virginia 5 years earlier to take a better job and audaciously rub his rabid love for the New York Giants in the angry faces of arch-rival Washington Redskins fans, his lone dark blue sweatshirt swallowed up by a swarm of large burgundy bodies. He was far away, and the film footage didn't exist. But there were 2 old black and white photographs that did. Unfortunately, those were far away too. He took them with him when he left. So I memorized them. In one, his body is suspended in midair, punting a football, his skinny leg and high-top shoe-covered toes pointing straight up to the sky like a teenage dancer auditioning to be the only boy member of the all-female Rockettes, a wide, gummy smile stretched beaming across his smooth, handsome face, in a jock's non-threatening good boy, non-rock and roll style. In the other, his arm is cocked back, ready to release the ball like a slingshot. His iconic number 21 stretched proudly across his chest. His eyes squinting confidently in the sun, almost smiling but defiantly refusing to. His bit of an overbite of less than perfect teeth showing, but his gums concealed except for a tiny part exposed by the left side of his top lip, slightly arched in a subtly sinister pre-Elvis Presley bad boy sneer, daring anyone to even think about trying to stop him. And spending summers at his house in Virginia, throwing around the old worn-out ball with him out back. My 2 older brothers and I watched him replay signature moves from his glory days with chipmunk-like darts of elusive speed. This now bald but still handsome 5'8.5" biblical David slaying strapping young Goliaths from the neighborhood a half head taller and half his age, while telling me to go long as he threw me a bomb further than I thought humanly possible right into my hands. And during the fall and winter, he would drive back to Brooklyn on weekends whenever he could to watch me play as I tried to impress him with my own artistically elegant, short but perfectly accurate spiral passes, the football skill at which I suddenly excelled, thrusting me unexpectedly into the role of quarterback, much to his great thrill and pride. I mean, was he as shocked as I was, or did he just hubristically take it in stride as the inevitable forward march downfield of his manifest destiny? My desperate yearning for him to be at every game echoed with the faint but tempering wonder of whether I could live up to it, and bounced off the walls of my aching hunger to follow in his heroic, fleet-footed steps. We lost the first game of the season. But I'd gotten through it without any embarrassing bodily malfunctions, a feat akin to a one-sided win in my own private solo sport within the team sport loss. Especially important since, as the quarterback, I was the focus of attention. However, I knew I was only as good as my last game, and with each one I'd be starting all over again without a toilet. Like a what's it called when someone has fear of heights?
Claustro.
Like a agoraphobia.
Vertigo. There you go. You said it just as I found the word. Yes, I'm going to do the adjective. Like a vertiginous tightrope walker without a net. See, I didn't need that. I just needed that. And early in game 2, with no outhouses set up for us and no public restroom facilities provided there at all for anyone, not even spectators, which I figured meant that normal people, which was everyone but me, just relieved themselves before leaving the house and didn't have to worry about it for the whole day, or at least for the length of a football game. I suffered my first private solo loss of the season, which meant it was no longer private. I tried to make it, to hold it in and make the feeling subside, but the fearsome force of nature's fury had been unleashed, and no levies or jetties of my muscles were any match for its momentum. Right there in my skin-tight, thin white knee-length football pants, in front of all the players for both teams, all the referees on the field, the head coaches and assistant coaches for both teams on the sidelines, and all the people watching in the stands, including girls and families with little children, uncontrollable gushes of diarrhea poured out of me like hot lava oozing from a volcano, spreading out menacingly toward the village like a brown-jerseyed monster middle linebacker chasing me down all over the countryside. There was nowhere to hide. And it was only the first play of the game. It was going to be a long day. I thought about running away, but we had no second-string quarterback, so I stayed stoic and outwardly unmoved, though it was outwardly obvious that I had done a lot of moving, and proceeded to throw 3 interceptions, all in the same spot, all to the same guy, who ran each one back for a touchdown, smiling all the way to the end zone each time. And since the passes were down the right sideline, I was the only one left who could tackle him and prevent him from scoring. But he was the fastest guy in the field, and at this point I could no longer run. It was in every crevice and valley, and I could feel it creeping around toward the front, seeping inside somewhere it had no business being, causing a dangerous infection, because that was an area that also had surgery requiring birth defects. But that's a subject for another story. All I could do was waddle, like a depressed duck who wanted to be shot. And at the beginning of the second half, Vinny D'Alessandro, the fullback who lined up right behind me in the I formation, asked me in the huddle with this heavy Brooklyn accent that made me not unsure if he was being sympathetic or accusatory or both. You know you got shit on your ass. Really? I replied, trying to sound sincerely incredulous. Oh man! I must have accidentally sat on some dog shit during halftime. As opposed to purposely sitting on dog shit. Now, even though I replied without hesitating, I knew they were onto me. Because besides the fact that it was there before halftime, I figured it was easy to discern if it was coming through from the inside rather than my having been the proverbial wall, and the dog decided to see if it would stick, and it stuck. And also because the stench was distinctly interhuman, not canine. Although it might not be a more offensive smell, it's a guiltier one. Wafting up from under us was the clean, fragrant, freshly cut grass, the recently cut, rich, mineral-scented soil, and me. As the soil was churned up by our cleats, I was counting on it soiling my pants from the outside where it had already been soiled from within to try to camouflage the culprit. Forgetting my fear of getting hurt, suddenly I wanted to be sacked, until I quickly caught on to the catch-22 that in order to get enough dirt on it dark enough to cover it up and keep it that way, I'd have to be knocked flat on it play after play, repeatedly. Not the best way to keep it from crawling under the security fence defecting south of the border down my skinny legs, a region to be defended at all costs. The ball was a hand grenade with its pin pulled every time I took the snap, and I had to get rid of it before it blew up in my face. And being that it was September 22nd, there was a second 22 to catch, which made it a catch 44, that although it might have been very humiliating to throw so many interceptions, it could have been even more humiliating to complete a touchdown pass for my own team, resulting in a coach or player giving me the obligatory congratulatory pat on the ass, only realizing what his hand was headed for after it was too late to reverse the motion. One thing I was able to camouflage was my pain, keeping my countenance cool as my skin was burning, and I bit down hard on my mouthpiece molded to my straight, perfect teeth that never had cavities or needed braces, desperately sucking out the last remnants of its spearmint-flavored saliva to soothe my system as if secretly sipping from a cup of herbal tea. Then I waddled up to the bent-over center, slightly and stiffly squatted down low enough to receive the ball, as low as I could go in my condition, shoved my hands under his big, beautifully green, grass-stained, clean-smelling butt that I wished was mine in defiance of the 10th commandment, "Thou shalt not covet thy lineman's ass," and called the signals in a phony, deep, nonchalantly macho voice, determined to stay on my feet and defeat and continue to play on, as if no one notices that only 21 of the 22 players on the field are not secretly praying for the field to rip apart at the 50-yard line like the Red Sea swallowing everyone up so that the waddling Jew can at last be free! By the fourth quarter, everything was in slow motion. Like an instant replay on TV, making me worried that it would keep replaying like that on an endless loop, and this was how I was doomed to spend the rest of my life. The ranting noise of our head coach, Marty Kaplan, had been swallowed up by the increasingly throbbing thrum in my head, and the sounds of voices on the field had become a slowed-down slurring, as if I was back on the operating room table, beginning to feel the first effects of the anesthesia. And the hard plastic helmeted face masks hovering over me were mutating into medical masks, and I began to count down the clock backwards, just as the surgeons always told me to do, right before disappearing into oblivion. And then, somehow, the final whistle blew. But I knew it wasn't over. I still had to get back to Coney Island. First, I had to make it to the bus stop several long blocks away, and I wasn't even free to waddle at my will because my teammate, Mitchell Feinberger, the middle linebacker, lived in my building, and I had to make the long journey home with him at my side. As we walked slowly on the sidewalk, instead of talking as we usually did, Mitchell took long drags from a cigarette, and I secretly sucked up his secondhand smoke through my nose deep into my brain to burn out the day. Neither of us looked at each other, and the other middle linebacker still stalking me was never acknowledged. And on the interminable bus ride, I had to endure the stinging stares and smirks of the other passengers, gradually twisting into pinched grimaces, and tried to pretend not to notice the comments they couldn't manage to keep from leaking under their skin-tight, thin white breaths. And since it would have been worse to ride standing up with everyone seeing it, I had to lower myself down onto my seat like a very pregnant woman, my legs barely bending and my weight sort of falling down onto my lower back, but trying to keep the monster tucked down, hidden away from public view, all while trying not to draw too much attention to myself. And as I contractedly reclined, my stiff legs straight out and then pressed together, Mitchell sitting next to me with his legs bent, spread casually wide apart, both of us with wild waves of messed up hair staring and muddy faces staring straight ahead in our dark blue football jerseys and once white football pants, like sweaty-faced Dustin Hoffman in his disheveled dark blue short-sleeved shirt and dirty white jeans, and fresh-faced Catherine Ross in her clean lacy white wedding dress on the back of the bus at the end of the Graduate with all those stone-faced straight-laced extras staring at them. I realized we'd been shut out 21-0. That number made me think of my father, and that although the morning made certain promises it couldn't keep, I still believed in it, because it kept its word about one thing: he wasn't there. When I finally got home, where my mother was sitting on the couch waiting for me, she asked how it went. I turned around, she gasped, and I collapsed, crying in her arms. Thank you very much.